Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Benjy Brandon, the founder and managing director of Princeton Strategic Advisors, and Brandon Newman, the founder, CEO, and chair of Zevant.
I'm Benjy Brandon, live in Princeton, New Jersey. I've served on a number of private and public company boards over the years. I'm currently the chairman of the board of one company. And I also provide CEO coaching, and I also provide strategy and strategic consulting to various organizations.
Great, thanks. Okay, Brandon?
I'm founder, CEO, chairman of Zevant. Funny little name, but we do a lot of good in helping healthcare to lower the cost of pharmacy benefits, drugs, and those sorts of things. I come from a long line of over 30 years of health technology. Love the journey, but now about that latter stage of my life, trying to fix a lot of the problems in healthcare that a lot of other people have a vested interest in.
Thanks. And we could talk for a whole nother podcast on healthcare and costs and things like that, but we won't. But let's talk about, we obviously know what you do now, but both of you have long and impressive careers. So let's talk about your journey. So Benjy, let's circle back to you on that. Talk to us about how you got to here.
Yeah, a somewhat circuitous route. I grew up actually in the East Coast, United States, near New York City, and went to college and actually learned to fly when I was 17, and was a FAA certified flight instructor during college and early after college. So aviation was very much a part of my early life. Then after getting my MBA, I actually went to McKinsey and Company and worked with them and working with strategy, organizational consulting with large global media companies and other industries. Then did the restructuring of United Media, which again was we own Snoopy, Peanuts, and a number of other large properties. And after that 3-year restructuring, co-founded a strategic venture capital fund called Scripps Ventures, which was sponsored by EW Scripps, which also owned the Food Network, Home and Garden Television, and a number of other large media assets. And then really went on my own about 12 years ago. I do have a couple of people that work for me now, but primarily now doing executive coaching for CEOs, leadership team facilitation, and strategy and organizational consulting. And throughout the last kind of 50 years of my career, have been in the board of about 15 companies. I would say 2/3 private, mostly VC backed, and a third of those companies were public companies. So have kind of a good feeling for that. And also now serve on the board of a couple of nonprofits, including a local bank in the Princeton, New Jersey area.
Great. Thanks, Benjy. Brandon?
Yeah, so you go way back 1994, going through school. I was not one of those guys that got a big giant scholarship. I had to work my way through. So I got a job working for a little company called Arx America as a PBM, pharmacy benefits manager. No reason and no qualifications to work for there. So worked my way up and found out that managing benefits was something I was interested in. Found out that I really loved solving big problems, even though I had a peon job. But that sort of catapulted me into learning a lot more about health technology. In 2000, I started the first of 10 businesses. That one still is thriving today. It's in the health technology space. Continue to evolve. I've been to a couple of very large organizations. You may know them: United Health Group, not a small company, Medco, all the way through the rounds of the big threes in healthcare. And then circling back in 2008, when e-prescribing EHRs became a big push, started the first of many businesses around enabling physicians to be able to bring their health record into an electronic format, manage billing much better, which really catapulted into a number of other businesses, which is why we're landing where we're at now. Moving into the latter stage of where we're at, was running a business that I'd started. It was a pharmacy benefits consulting shop. We were very interested in looking at every single claim that came through. And it was really the beginning of the concepts of Savant. Couldn't possibly look at every single claim when we're talking about millions of claims. And so we said, let's look at some automation. Went back to the roots of building some code and found out that we had a cool little tool that could do a lot of things for our customers. And before we knew it, we had pharmacy benefit managers, consultants, and other large payers calling me saying, hey, what you built there for your company, we'd like to deploy. And by the end of 2017, we had 5 very large companies paying for a product I had no business providing them, and that was the beginning of Zavant. So a little long story there, but that's how this company came to be.
No, thanks for taking us through that. That's a fascinating journey. And you are a portfolio company of Tech Council Ventures, right?
That is correct. We've been together with Tech Council since the very end of 2020, and we still continue to thrive within that partnership.
Great. Okay. So one of the reasons why I want to bring you folks together is because of the Sam Altman drama that we saw taking place the last couple months. And it reminded me how important it is for entrepreneurs and leaders to understand board governance. And clearly, we could spend the whole podcast talking about Sam Altman and what happened and what might have happened. Clearly, there was some dysfunction there. But love to get each of your takes on sort of how you saw that, again, as folks who really know about board governance, and then we could talk about sort of best practices so that the rest of us can learn how to best manage and lead and a board, whatever size company or organization we have. So let's start with you, Brandon. What was your take on what happened?
I'm going to assume we don't want to get in the nitty gritty as to all the other reasons why around the safety of AI and those sorts of things. But I do think that they play into whatever your mission and vision is. I think that that's core to the management of the company and the board management of their own governance of that organization and the leadership. What I saw was, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert in this, but you watch from the sidelines and you see things and you apply them to your own life and what were you doing when he was doing this and what was the board doing. I think roles played a big part in roles and balancing those roles were, CEO chairman overstepping a role, were certain board members overstepping their roles, going beyond governance instead of staying in the lanes. And from my perspective, it felt like there were lines that were beginning to be crossed, and that for me, and as I look at how I manage my business, those lines are absolutely crucial. And if as soon as you start crossing some of those lines, it does play into the success of the business. And so that led, and from what I saw on both sides, manipulation, non-transparency, and when a board and an executive team does not have all the information from either side, it does get very tricky. And running those lanes at Zavant, it gets very difficult to not scare them with every piece of information, but in the same sense, they need to have the information they need to be able to govern, and vice versa. You've got to be able, as a board member, to realize that your job is not to run that business; it's to govern, the team, to govern the company, make sure that your policies and mission as a company are being honored. And from my perspective, it just felt like a lot of the wires get crossed.
Got it. Thanks. Benjy?
Yeah, I think those are all great takes. To add to that, I would just say, I don't know Sam and don't know the players in that situation, but it does seem like he's emerging as an iconic leader, kind of like a Steve Jobs in many ways. Maybe has some, rough edges in terms of how he approaches certain things based on what I've read. And it's kind of what you see in sports teams sometimes, sometimes you have an iconic player and sometimes they're difficult to manage. I've been the board of a company once where there was one key player that was actually the number 2 in the company, and he was literally the value creation machine for that organization, and he was very difficult to manage. And but the key is he didn't cross, malfeasance lines, lines that you would typically have to really let someone go from. So we always talked about him as a bull in a china shop, and our job as a board was to keep the china from breaking. And we did that out of the goodness of our heart in terms of wanting to really drive value for the shareholders. It would have been easier for the board in some ways to basically make a transition, but we knew from a value creation point of view, keeping him in place as long as possible was the right thing for shareholders, and as long as he didn't do anything that was really over the line. So sometimes you have to as a board member, leave your ego at the door and really focus on value creation and take the road that maybe is more, work intensive in terms of managing some challenging players, but players that really are bringing tremendous value to the organization. So I guess that's kind of one of my lessons learned that kind of hit me when I started reading through some of the different stories about this situation.
Right. Those are both, great insights. One of the things, I want to focus on was his investments in other businesses, his side hustles or, other endeavors. It was incredible reading about how prolific that was, and I'm sure that was hard for the board to deal with. Have either of you seen that, as far as CEOs being involved with other activities that are of concern, or is this a sort of so great an anomaly on such a high level that it's few and far between?
Yeah, from my vantage point, even I have been in a number of boards, I have not really hit that issue that strongly. Most of the CEOs I've been a board member of are pretty dedicated to what they do. So I would not say for myself I've seen that in any broad perspective, but I'm sure in Silicon Valley that's happening more and more as capital is plentiful, and these entrepreneurs are making so much money. Their options are kind of limitless of what they want to do with their time.
Yeah, and I actually appreciate that as a CEO who is ultimately focused on one thing here. I'm also an entrepreneur, and it, sometimes that's the that's the lifeline. That's the blood of an entrepreneur is create, and to the degree that you overstep bounds and say, hey, I want to distance my attention to something else, that is certainly outside of the bounds. But we have that's the thing is, as you build a successful business, many opportunities just sort of come out of those entrepreneuristic organizations. And so I've always faced on a daily basis with a new opportunity that we could pursue, and the hat that I have to wear is not one of, hey, how do I personally pursue this? How do we all at Savant, the board, the team, how do we all benefit from that if there is any opportunity? And I could say there have been dozens that have come out of this that we either pursue or push back or look at ways that we can be able to monetize or partner to do it. And so it's definitely coming back to a point of governance and transparency. You have to be transparent. You can't sort of just start doing things without a board or an executive team knowing, and that way everybody has the information. And no one needs self-enrichment, and there should be every government documentation that you have. You absolutely should have self-enriching language that prevents that sort of behavior.
Got it. And so let's talk about best practices. So as we all know, different needs for different size companies. A startup's board is different than a corporate board. And so let's go through that since you've both been involved with startups. How do you see that, Brandon, as far as you start a company, how does that board get developed?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it as a pendulum. When you first start a business or maybe even a plant, right? You put the seed in the ground. You don't have this big trunk of a tree that you can sustain yourself, and so you do need more of that soil. And look at the board like the soil in that case, where you need to depend on that soil. You need to depend on a board. The board can't be exhaustive and large and expansive, but you need some rules. And I know that even in the Tech Council Ventures engagement, we had some abilities to be able to depend upon the board a little bit more so than as we grow and as that tree and that plant grows and is a little more sustainable, then that pendulum swings a little bit closer to the middle. At some point, do you see a point where you need less dependence on the board? Yes, to a degree. I think that balance, striking that balance, is really the hardest thing that I've been able to encounter. How much should you push from a board versus support? But ultimately, going from startup, you absolutely need to have a board. You need to have board governance to help sustain that plant as it grows. But the tricky part is, when do you get that pendulum to move a little bit more to the middle and striking that balance at the best time? Because otherwise, resentment ensues, and potentially overreaching or underreaching, or not letting that executive team, that CEO and team, be able to truly thrive. A board managed company is doomed to fail. But if you get that to a point where it's too far over here too soon, that company can absolutely implode very quickly. So it's timing, it's balance, and it's, again, going back to governance. You've got to make sure those documents are in place.
Got it. Okay, Benjy?
Yeah, I would just support what Brandon just said. I mean, basically, in the beginning, a company usually is founded by a founder or a couple of founders, right? So when you think about kind of like even leverage, they're driving the show, right? Because without the two of them in a garage, I mean, there's nothing, right? So it's not like a board can come in and like start, pushing people around, right? So, and they also typically are alone, right? They're one or two people. So typically boards, I think, really are more partners earlier on, as he said, and really are kind of together working with the founders, trying to get the company to the next level. And then, later on, it transitions more to a separation. Their separation starts growing, and it's more about accountability, governance, et cetera, and stepping out of the way more and more as the management teams really take hold, broaden their capability and build out an organization. So I very much agree with what he said and about that overall transition.
I mean, from an entrepreneur, and I'll just sort of speak, not to interrupt there, Jim, but you're wearing so many hats that it gets really tough when you're the operator, the salesman, the marketer, the financing, and the partially the tech team all in one. Being able to manage a company and wear those hats and keep it all in line is tough, and that's the reason why I felt a board was very helpful to keep my head from being on too much of a swivel.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and I know I've always advised an advisory board at first, and once you get funding, formalize things a bit more going forward. Is that how you see, particularly for startups and growing ventures, the right sort of procession?
Yeah, in a not-for-profit organization, truly an entrepreneur environment, you absolutely run that scenario. You're in a garage is the best way to describe it. You're creating things, but once you get to that point where you've market tested, your revenue has grown, and you're sustainable, you certainly need the board governance. And I wouldn't recommend an overly difficult board prior to that, because there's so much that you're trying to do to even prove to even need to be in the dance. And so when you get to that funding stage, you're bringing in other people who need a little bit more protections, and you can't just sort of say, here's a bunch of money and there's no governance. And so it does make a lot of sense, and that's how it worked in almost every case that we had over 10 different businesses.
Got it. Is that how you see it as well, Benjy?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So really, in terms of having the right level, the tricky thing is really transitioning from, again, as I said before, kind of that partnership to more of an accountability type oversight governance point of view, where you're kind of moving from the top. You're kind of two people working, partnering, and it's getting to more like that as the organization becomes larger, and as he said, as outside investors come in and other requirements come in, and also a larger customer base, so all of a sudden, exposure, risk, basically managing risk starts going up when there's more to lose, right? So in the first couple of days, there's not that much to lose because it's just getting going, right? But there's a lot more risk management that emerges on many dimensions as the organization becomes more successful.
Right. And so, however, when you're building your board, just say your advisory board, you're building those key components, those leaders, those professionals that can balance and support the company and help it grow, right? And then some of those may stay on into the formal board as funding and fundors come onto the board and make it more independent. Is that typically how one would see that?
One thing I would say about that, I was actually just talking to someone about that yesterday, is that I typically see advisory boards as individuals. So a CEO might need technical knowledge. They might need an introduction to a certain, industry. I typically see advisory boards as individual people that can bring value to the CEO and the organization, right? As opposed to the board as more of an operating team, almost in a sense, that is operational, helping provide operational oversight to the organization. So a board should be, in my mind, quite close with each other. I've seen many organizations where advisory board members never meet each other, right? Because they're each bringing different things to the table that are unrelated to the other person. So, again, that's kind of how I would compare and contrast. One being a set of individuals, another being kind of like more of a team.
I'm very happy to hear how you just stated that, Benjy, because I've struggled with that. You do hear often, hey, you go get your advisory board, and I just sit here going, I don't think that they would ever come together. So yeah, do we have a bit of an advisory over compensation or technical or product? Sure. And in a lot of cases, especially as you are on the, let's call it the seed to A round, it's less formal. And you do have people that you turn to, the board knows about, the executive team knows about, that do know the industry or do know the technical knowledge, and you do depend upon to a certain degree to provide it. I could say where I'm at today, it's been very informal, but we do have a lot of partners and customer partners who do serve that role. So I wouldn't say that the advisory board has to be formal, but I love that you stated that they're individuals, and that can take any form that you want.
Yeah.
Got it. So let's talk about boards for nonprofits, right? Clearly, Sam Altman had a nonprofit board, quote unquote. Obviously, a very interesting and anomalous sort of situation there. But for nonprofits, a lot of folks sit on nonprofit boards, including you folks. I know I do. I've led advisory boards as a nonprofit and boards of directors. How do you see the differences for nonprofits?
I guess for me, one thing is there's a lot more decisions to be made in the sense of it's a wider aperture, I think, for what's on the table. I'm on the board of a bank, for example, and a nonprofit bank, and the question if it serves underserved populations. And so all of a sudden the question is like, well, should we lower fees? Should we, increase interest rates to deposits? So making decisions you might otherwise never consider in a profit bank, but that you would in this situation. So there's a lot more decisions to be made. And the other thing I would say is that having been on boards of a performing arts organization, attentive listening to other board members, because people on that board, we had an actor, a conductor, an ex-CFO, et cetera. So you're bringing a lot more diverse groups of people typically to the table on those boards. And I think listening attentively is really important. And lastly, I would say sometimes, as we all know, board members are on there because they bring a lot of basically resources to the board in terms of funding that they have. Some of those people may not bring a lot of capability around what's required on the board. So kind of crafting roles and responsibilities that kind of weave around, where some people are on the board to really bring resources to the table, but maybe not as much capability, and others who bring less resources, but can bring a lot of capability to the oversight.
My perspective, Benji, you hit all the major points and beyond. I just sum it up for me, and I wouldn't say it's an exhaustive experience in nonprofits, but it seems like the overarching motivation for why I am on a board for a nonprofit versus one for-profit is very different. Yes, you have to be fiscally responsible in both, but why you do what you do, and you can use the OpenAI, example. Protecting AI, protecting the human race. I actually read that in OpenAI's statement, protecting the human race from, technology and the possible harm. That's not something we talk about at our board meeting in a for-profit. We're talking about, certainly how do we help, people, achieve lower cost in their prescription care, but we're not, that sort of motivation is a little bit more financial and growth centric and exit opportunity, sort of scenarios. And so I think motivation plays a big role with that. But everything else that Benjy just said was perfectly stated.
Yeah, and I think I'll just sort of build on what Benjy stated. It is very different when you have an advisory board or board of directors for a nonprofit. Different folks bring different, intentions, right? And some are big donors, and and they're managed differently and have different roles. So that's a little trickier actually, as I think about it. Would you say that, Benjy, as far as for nonprofits, when you have a large board and different people bringing different things for different reasons, that's got to be a bit more complex?
Definitely, especially for the executive director or whoever is the kind of the leader of the organization. And also sometimes those boards, I actually was an advisor to a board, a very well-known board in New York City that had, I think, about 35 members, and we're talking, hundreds of millions of dollars kind of flowing in. And those large boards become unwieldy. So what typically happens is, 3 to 6, whether it's formal or even more, this was more informal, become kind of like a kind of a core board and a core set of advisors to the executive director, because otherwise it becomes kind of unwieldy. So, and because there's some advantages of having a very large board, because typically board members and money can be very aligned in terms of resources. And for some of these nonprofits who have some great vision and some great missions that they're trying to achieve, there's nothing wrong. Trying to get the board members who can bring the resources is actually critical. So it's not just something that's a side note. It's actually very, very important to try to attract those board members.
Right. This has been a great conversation. One thing I wanted to mention, though, were the relationship between the board and the employees. How do employees see the boards, right? And is that something you have to manage carefully, to make sure that there's alignment and a culture of, progress in the company or nonprofit?
I have a couple comments, and I agree with what Brandon said earlier, that I think it's really important that the CEO runs a company. So I don't think board members should be like, milling around and calling employees left and right, et cetera, et cetera. I will say there was one CEO of an organization recently, in terms of choosing board members, who was very big on culture, mission, fit. This is a very large organization. And he said he would want any board member that he put on the board, he would want to be confident that if they were sent out to a town hall, right, in some plant or somewhere, that board member could basically, understand how to communicate the mission of the organization and would basically represent the company properly in front of employees. So that really his main point was making sure that more the board member understood the mission of the employees and the culture that they had bought into, as being really important.
That's interesting, because every board meeting we start off with is our values first, which speaks to our culture, our vision, and our mission to set the tone for all of the discussion. And really, when we sign up a board, we're saying, hey, this is our mission and vision and our values and our culture. And if we interview for that fit, and if you're not going to fit it, it gets really tough to be able to say, hey, are you going to be able to operate within this? We operate for certain reasons, and yes, it's for the global, good of the business. But if someone is going against the grain, you find out very quickly, because decisions are made against that culture. And I've been very grateful for the team that has supported that culture. And I think that it does matter. It absolutely does matter to have boards aligned. Your question was around interaction between employees and the board members. I would never say that we prevent it, but I also am a huge believer in the management team running the business, and I think we clarified that very clearly. When you get board members a little too involved and connected to employees, there is that risk of less listening, more telling. I'm not saying I had that experience, but I've seen that, and I think that OpenAI, you had some scenarios there where there was too much closeness, where employees may have been influenced too much, or that it was pitted against, and I think that those are very problematic. And so again, going back to balance and in establishing roles and creating those lines and putting that in your documentation, your contracts, and your agreements, just to prevent all of that sort of stuff that happens or can happen afterwards.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, usually toward the end of our conversation, we do short lightning questions to highlight some of the tips that we can give to our audience. So, what would you say one tip for entrepreneurs, so that they can better manage boards? What would you recommend?
My recommendation is, as a platform to trust building, is invest in building strong one-on-one relationships with each board member. Not to play them off against each other, but I think you need to have that trust-based relationship with each one of them, so that when you're at a meeting and you may have a controversial or a kind of a new point of view you want to bring the board to, that there's really that kind of that foundation exists underneath.
And I love that. Trust is crucial, and when trust is broken, there's reasons why. My one tip would be measure twice and cut once, then communicate. It's very easy to say, "Hey, I didn't know," or "I didn't," you didn't have that governance in place, but you have to make sure that the right governance that you want is in place. Then things just naturally flow well from there. So invest in a good lawyer, invest in good documentation, and then make sure that all follow suit, and me included as chairman and CEO. I'm reminded every once in a while from my board that says, "Hey, remember those documentations that we put together? Let's make sure that you're following it just as much as we are." And it's good. It holds us accountable so that we can have that trust.
Great. And what about from a board member's point of view? How can a board member do a better job on a board, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit?
I'll lead off with that. I'll just continue with a little bit more of what I've been saying is, don't ever let the board run the company. Stay out of the affairs of running. And this is sort of the quote, non-quote from a board member that said, "Our job is not to run the business. Our job is to support and to govern the organization, but it's to support the CEO and helping the CEO manage the leadership team. And anywhere where we're making decisions for the company, that's an overstep." And so as a board member, there's always a temptation that says, "Well, hey, I think you should do this," versus, what is your strategy and how can I support it? Or, hey, if that strategy is starting to look misguided, how do we help that CEO and management team to guide them back to where they need to be at? But from a board, the trust that can be created between the board and the CEO and the management team is by truly focusing on supporting versus overreaching and managing business.
Benji?
There's obviously a lot of dimensions of being a board member, but the one thing for some reason today I hit on was just do the work and be prepared. Like really lean in as a board member and show up to meetings prepared, and really lean into understanding the industry, the company's, situation, buy the company's products if it's a consumer product, but really kind of lean in with all of your personhood into your role, but stay as was stated, but stay within your swim lane.
Okay.
I might take your quote. I love that. It's good info, Benji.
And one last question. What about, one tip for board chairs?
The one thing I would just say is I'm the chairman of the board of a company, and I always feel like it's my job to be looking ahead, whether it's looking ahead to the next board meeting a year from now, or looking ahead to where the industry is going, et cetera, is always trying to be looking ahead. And then when it comes to working with the CEO, it's kind of a dual relationship, partnering and holding them accountable. So I think that doing both, I think, is really important. I think if it's just an accountability relationship, it's going to be less productive. So I think having that kind of trust-based partnership and being able to dual that with an accountability relationship that needs to exist as well is kind of the magic you're trying to make happen.
Yeah, and I'm wearing both hats, right? So for a lot of us who are both the chair and the CEO, I know this is going to go against the grain to a certain degree for a lot of folks that are in my spot, But the one thing that has helped me to be most successful as a chair when I am a CEO and I'm wearing both hats is just to be vulnerable. It is absolutely okay that you don't have all the right answers. You could study all night long, cram for weeks ahead of the board meeting, and still not get it right. But I think boards appreciate CEOs and chairs that are CEOs that don't come in polished, that don't necessarily have all the right answers, that they're there to learn, that they're willing to admit that there's a lot of experience in the room that they can learn from, and that vulnerability, as long as it's not to a fault, can be one of the best assets that you can bring to a board.
I love that tip. That's really important. All right, this has been a great conversation, folks. We usually end with a quote or a poem or a saying that's meaningful to our guests. So let's start with you, Benjy.
Mike, you had mentioned to me you were asked that, so I looked around and really gravitated to right now was that nothing has ever been done by a person who says it can't be done. So that's Eleanor Roosevelt. So I think the idea that that being kind of a positive minded, glass half full type approach to life every day you wake up is kind of a key to success and a key to also enjoying your life and having a life that's valued.
Great.
Love it.
Ben?
For me, I'm a product of the 80s. I grew up as a teenager watching an iconic hero, Jordan. And I heard the quote early on, and I adopted it throughout my entire life. And it does go against a lot of board members, but I say it because it speaks to the vulnerability. But I failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed. And I believe in that you show up. You're often admitting to failure in a board meeting because every well-struck plan doesn't always turn out perfect, and you're nuancing and you're pivoting and you're constantly moving. And if that was if you're trying to achieve some sort of perfection as your goal, you're going to be the least happy person. And so we seek to succeed because you're trying to win, and you're going to end up failing through that process. So that's my little bit of my life's motto.
That's great.
Great way to end. Thank you, folks. This has been really great. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.